Welcome to OutWithDan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello, and welcome back to OutWithDan. Today, I'm excited to talk with Ren DeStefano about How I Will Kill You. Welcome, Ren.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
I love the title of the book. You know, I'm a little twisted, so anything that a title comes along that is different, I'm like, oh, that interests me. And as I say with a lot of people, I think the cover of a book is important. So how did you sort of come upon the title?
The title was the working title. And it's so funny because I've written children's books for over a decade, and I've never had my working title become the title. So when it was my working title, I thought, well, this is a bit much. They probably won't go for it. But there was just never any talk of changing it. So I said, okay, I guess this is where we're going.
Well, I love it. And you sort of get a feeling straight out of the gate that this is not going to be a cozy romance. And that's okay. So it was, though, in some ways, a strange, unique romance novel. Mm-hmm. There is a lot of love and a lot of maybe mistaken love in this. And that's something that really resonated with me. We see three triplets come into the book and how they bring into their life and what's going on with them. Give us a little backstory on the triplets and where we find them.
So it's three identical triplets who were abandoned as babies. They've never found their parents, and they grew up in the foster system. And something really unique about their story is that even though they kept in touch, they grew up in three very different lifestyles. So one was put into sort of a nuclear foster family, and that's our narrator. And she looks over at her two sisters, and every time she's reunited with them, she sees how much they've changed and how hard life has been for them. And so she develops this habit of sort of sabotaging her own happiness. Mm-hmm. And she thinks, okay, even if we can't be together, at least we can be united in our misery, sort of. And so here they are now, 25 years old, young adults for all intents and purposes. And they're branching out into finding love, finding a life for themselves. And they learn super early on, after a life of disappointment, a life of hardship and lack of control, that dating is not going to be much different. And so they develop this very unique way of processing that and deciding we are going to meet somebody that we love. We're going to fall in love with them, have a perfect whirlwind romance. And then before they can break our hearts, we're going to kill them.
It's in real life, sometimes we get it put in those positions where it's like, well, maybe that's a good fantasy. So one of the things about the sisters, and I have known quite a few twins and a few triplets, but mostly a lot of twins in my life. And there is this thing, it's like an invisible wave that goes between them. They really do often know what each other's thinking, where they are at a certain time. I thought you did a really great job in bringing that out. We see the sisters, as you say, they grew up differently, but there's so much about each other that they understand. Mm-hmm. I can only imagine what it would be like to be separated from a sibling, but especially if you're a triplet, that, you'll put into situations that are very different. And you make that interesting, and I liked that. You also brought them to a place of a small town, which I was a little surprised about that, because I would have probably thought it might be set in a large town. So was there a big impetus for choosing a small town versus a large town?
Yeah. So what I was thinking about is this is set in the modern day. And previously I'd mostly written fantasy. So I was like, okay, this is going to be one of my first contemporary books. And I thought, okay, we live in the age of technology, security cameras, GPS. How do I navigate that when you have not one, but three serial killers working together? And I thought, well, there are still towns throughout the world where it's still a bit, cut off. Nothing ever happens. Mm-hmm. People don't lock their doors. So they scout out places wherever they'd like to go. They pick a state, a climate, whatever they'd like. And they think, okay, let's find a small town where we're not likely to get caught. We'll check out the gas stations. Are there security cameras? Will we be spotted? And that all factored in. And I settled on the desert. And the desert was a lot of fun for me as a New Englander who has all the four seasons and a very cold winter when I was writing the first draft. And it's so clean and so pretty. You go out there and you've got the dirt and you've got this clear cloudless sky. And I just really fell in love with that being a setting for them.
I like it. And it becomes another character. And I think that's something. The desert can be loving and kind, and it can be hard as hell. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the thing that I see when I'm reading your book in this particular setting, is that you spent time there, you understand how it functions, and it becomes, like I said, another character in the book, which is fun for the reader, I think.
Yeah, it almost helps her. She thinks of the sky as watching her at times. She mentions, I'm just here for a little while. I'm just going to do my thing and leave. And when you learn, I think wherever you live, if you learn to use the environment around you to your advantage, it feels like a friend.
I agree. There's one of those little sayings that comes on little posters, bloom where you're planted. And it really is true, because you get a chance as a human to make that happen.
Yeah.
Where possible, because I think that's one of the things that make your characters, the three sisters, sympathetic, is we see that they did not have a perfect life, and we see that in a lot of ways they're really trying to find a bit of utopia, even though they think it's momentarily.
Yeah, they see each other as home for sure.
Yeah, and they have hope in that, and I think that's a good thing. Tell us about the neighbor Dara.
Dara, oh my gosh, Dara broke my heart. I loved her, and I think she was just a culmination of so many people I've known in life too. And everyone in this story ends up meaning more to our main character than she intends, because everything's a prop. She sees her two sisters as they're the only real thing, and everyone else I have to learn to manipulate to get what I want. And so when she meets her neighbor Dara, she's this sort of free-spirited, just kind of chain smoking, doesn't hold back, speaks her mind next door neighbor. And our narrator is thinking, well, I like her, but her role is still that when I've committed this murder and I'm weeping and I'm crying, I'll have a character witness, right? But she discovers she really cares for this person, and she comes into a position where she would like to help her, and she's caught because the act she's playing is not meant to be real. And so the friends of this character she's adopted are not meant to be real. And so she's very confused about why she's having so many feelings.
And I think that was another thing that resonated with me. Dara is so real in a lot of ways. And of course, Sissy puts a bit of her own life onto Dara and assumes things about Dara that she would operate the same way as Sissy and her sisters do. And that's not always the case, because, each human is different. The siblings have a connection and a bond that is really, really different than anyone else in the story. And I think that's one of the things that sometimes as humans, we fool ourselves into believing that everyone else is just like us, when none of us are alike. We all have our own differences.
Yeah, there's a lot of projection for sure. Sometimes her projection gets very specific. She's faced with some situations. She knows she's not going to get the happy ending she wants, and so she's like, "You can have this happy ending. I'm going to help you do these things."
and in that way, Sissy becomes quite a bit of a protector for not only her sisters, which we see as the book progresses, but also of her neighbor Dara, which is a really nice thing, because it gives Sissy something that, as a reader, is unique, and it gives us a reason to be able to root for Sissy, which is something that's really nice. I will say that I thought Edison must be handsome as hell, because you certainly gave us a very handsome character. Who is Edison?
Edison is Sissy's intended mark. And it's when she meets him for the first time, she's sitting in a diner trying to scope out her target. She's got her sister on a Bluetooth who's watching from the car. They're looking for clues. This person seems like he might be attached to somebody. This person seems messy. And then Edison walks in and the sun shines and the angels sing, right? And she immediately, love at first sight, sees him as this beautiful person. And she's painting these scenarios. I bet he stoops to pet dogs when somebody's walking by on the sidewalk. I bet he rocks out to music in the car. I bet somebody's broken his heart, and she immediately is planning a life with him. And once she starts to spend time with him, and I think this is something Edison has in common with Dara, is that they both are beautiful, sort of effervescent people who are interesting. But when Sissy spends time with them, she learns that they're very vulnerable, that they're not what they outwardly seem, that they do need help like everybody else does. And she falls into that protector category. So here she is, I'm going to kill you, and I'm going to use you as my character witness, but she's falling in love with these people nonetheless.
I will say, and I'm not going to talk about what comes up, but chapter 16 and chapter 17, certainly I did not see it coming. And that is something I will pat you on the back about, because oftentimes when you read a book and you sort of see the way it's going, but chapter 16, really, I was like, oh, I did not see that. And then, of course, chapter 17, I love chapter 17 because it gave, as we were talking, it gave Sissy an ability to change some of her narration. And so that was a good thing. How did the surprises come about for you? Did you know it in advance, or did it sort of come as you were writing it organically? How did that work?
So I didn't necessarily know in advance, but my agent, shout out to Barbara, wonderful, amazing, genius person. She talks about something called contract with the reader. And contract with the reader is, okay, you have a character, let's say like Sissy, who's doing bad things or planning bad things. And so you can't just give them an easy go. You can't give them just a happy time. And so this was kind of a moment of chaos where a lot of the plans she laid and a lot of the just kind of sweet little notions of how this would go blew up in her face. And you see it, I think, the edge within her as a human, because she plays this act really well. She plays the part of, I am just going to be everything that everyone needs me to be, because it's all an act. It doesn't matter. And so for Edison, I'm going to be the perfect girl. And for Dara, I'm going to be your best friend. But it all just collides, and not in a way she's anticipating. And we see that really dark edge, and we see what she's capable of in these chapters.
And speaking of dark edge, I really felt like Sissy was on the edge quite a bit. Maybe metaphorically and physically all at the same time. You see, since Sissy is the narrator, she tells us what she needs us to know, right? Because that's what a narrator does in a book. So Sissy comes at us with a lot of honesty, which is really important for me as a reader, because I don't like to be fooled. Because if you fool me, then you as an author and I as a reader, we don't have a contract, because you torn that up. So that is something that I thought Sissy did. And what we see with Sissy is when things don't go the way she anticipates them, she's quick on her feet. But I find that she's on the edge a lot, which gives the book a deliciousness as a reader. And so I'm assuming that was a conscious role on your part.
It was, yeah. So I love thrillers and I read a lot. And so something I see a lot of is the unreliable narrator, which is a lot of fun. It can be done very, very well and really twist you. But in this case, it ended up, I thought about that. I thought, well, she's a serial killer. So really, she's already told you. She's told you. It's not a surprise. And so it's kind of the opposite. She's just very confessional. And I think it comes from her foster care childhood and not having that control and not really feeling seen. And I just need somebody to tell all of my thoughts to, unabashedly. And she doesn't speak any of them out loud. She's really got everybody fooled. She's got a whole town that loves her and sees what she's putting out, consciously. Everything's very calculated. But with the reader, very, very detailed. Here I am holding hands with my man at the park. We're having a great day. I can't wait to slice his throat, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Very, very honest.
Which is very refreshing too, because that way when we see some of the growth and development in Sissy and the story itself, we're able to relate to it, because she's shared with us, oh, this didn't quite go the way I thought it was, but here I am doing this. And so that was really, really interesting to me. So I did not get any hints on how to kill the next person, but
Not an instruction manual, don't.
Right, precisely, which I think is something maybe to point out, because the title is salacious and fun, but yet it's something that anyone can read, because it's not really teaching you how to off somebody. It's talking about much more about emotions and what happens in someone's mind and what they feel.
Yeah, I think if anybody went into this book thinking, oh, I want to know how to kill somebody, by the time they got to the end, they might say, never mind, this is more trouble than it's worth. This did not go as expected at all. So I won't give it away, but it's not very encouraging.
But I think once again, though, Sissy is a people pleaser, which if you're a people pleaser, that's a very hard role to play. And it is, as you say, she spends the entire book trying to help others, and unbewittingly is hopefully helping herself, which is a really interesting thing. So I noticed also that I like the fact that they use different names. So they're hiding out, and they use names that I feel like they sort of identify with where they are in that moment. And I like the fact that they use that to protect themselves. And I find that in this world, we have a lot of people who are identifying themselves as certain ways. And I sort of felt like your characters were doing a little of that as well. So what's a good takeaway from this?
I think, it's so interesting to see how people receive what you write and what they take out of it. It's always just really interesting. And I think for these characters, they have a legal name that is so insignificant to them that you really only learn it later in kind of passing. And they've reinvented themselves with names that they have only for each other. And so you get the sense, even though they refer to each other by Sissy as the main character, her sisters are Moody and Iris, and they have stories for how they've adopted these names. You know that when they interact with people from their past, they just mention, oh, they're using my old name, the name I don't really associate myself with anymore. And then they also have these fake throwaway names. And the fake name that Sissy uses when she's playing this act with Edison and with Dara is Jade. And she actually does not associate herself with Jade. So she refers to herself as, okay, this is Jade's family. This is Jade's problem. This is Jade's life, her history. I'm Sissy, and still not having a connection to that legal name. And I think it's really about like kind of owning yourself.
Yes. I love that. I so enjoyed this book, Ren. This was really delicious. You've done such a great job. Do you have a website or social media that you would like to share?
You can find me on Instagram. It's Ren DeStefano author.
Lovely. Come back anytime. I would love to chat again.
I'd love to be here. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks. Hang on for me just a minute. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.